people have conflicts with one another, they rule over them. When people like the Philistines, they're kind of like a pirating, raiding, raping kind of people. When they come in, they're just going to raise up leaders, people like Gideon, who's a simple man. Women is like Deborah, this amazingly wise woman, one of the heroines of the Old Testament. He raises her up, and she actually leads an army in battle because she is so courageous. Women like Jael, who you've never heard of before, but it's an amazing story. Men like Samson. It says the strongest man in the Bible. He's like Superman, this big, huge dude, big, long hair. You have to think like, like wrestling, professional wrestler type, okay? And here he is on the scene, and God's going to raise up these amazing people to defend and to rule. But he's not going to have a king. So if you ever wanted to, you should go back through and read through Judges. There are actually some amazing stories in there. I suggest reading about Gideon, reading about Samson. Samson's a great story. If you've ever had that friend who was really, really into God, and then they met the boy of their dreams, the girl of their dreams, the man of their dreams, the woman of their dreams, and all of a sudden their faith wasn't that important to them, and they just left it. You've had friends like that? You've known people like that? I have. Heck, there's times when I was that person. When, God was so important to me, but then that one relationship came along, and that just started taking all my time and all my attention. That's Samson. That he basically leaves his relationship with God, and he breaks his relationship with God for a woman. And that leads to his ultimate death and his demise. But it's an amazing story. And in the midst of this time in Judges, there's another book, another story. And you'll see it up here in the supplemental books, and it's called Ruth. If you've never read the story of Ruth, it's 4 chapters. Just 4. It's really interesting. Actually, Oprah Winfrey, pretty popular woman, she's named after a character in the book of Ruth. The character's name is Orpah, and her mom actually spelled the name wrong on the birth certificate. So she's now known as Oprah. But she's named after Orpah, who is the sister-in-law of Ruth. When you read this story, if you've never read it before, it's 4 chapters. It's a great story and lays the classic love story. And you'll absolutely love it. It's that kind of, it's like it'll be a date movie at some point. It will be a date movie, I promise you. But it's a great story about Ruth, a woman named Ruth, who is a Moabite woman who forsakes her community, who forsakes her false gods, who forsakes her whole life out of friendship and out of reverence to God. And she's a woman of great integrity. And she would be someone who would hang on that wall of our family tree with a lot of esteem, because she basically says to her mother-in-law, she says, where you go, I will go. Your God will be my God. And we see a picture of what true friendship is and what integrity is. And the story of Ruth is sort of nestled in here in the Judges between 2 great battles. So while it's not one of the chronological books, it's actually, it's a really easy read. It's a few chapters, and you can read it. But if you read it in the context, like knowing that this is what's going on in the world, that Judges is what's going on, Ruth makes a whole lot more sense. And it's a love story by a woman named Ruth. She and her sister-in-law and her mom, and they're basically, all the men die, and they're alone, and these women kind of come together. And then before you know it, she falls in love with a man named Boaz. And they go on, if you look at your timeline, if you look at your bloodline, they go on to be very, very important in the bloodline of Jesus, important people. And again, here's Ruth, who's a Moabite. She's not pure Israelite blood, just like Rahab, like other people, like Tamar. You have people who are not 100% Jewish who are in this bloodline. And that's going to be important. In fact, we'll come back to later. So as we end this period of the conquest and the Judges, what happens? Well, they've had several judges be in power. They've had a lot of attacks. They've had a lot of war. They're having a really bad time. And all of a sudden the people say, enough is enough. You know what? We want a king. We want to be like other kingdoms who have kings. We want someone we can look up to, someone who's going to instill fear in the hearts of our enemies, someone who's going to lead us into battle, someone we can say, yes, this is our king. This is who we are following. And the last judge, Samuel, is a prophet. And they say to him, and Samuel talks with God, and they say, we want a king. And Samuel goes to God and says, they want a king. And God says, no, they don't. Because you know what? If I give them a king, the king is going to tax them, and he's going to enslave them, and he's going to take their land. They don't want a king. You see, God didn't want it to be about a monarchy, a bunch of people worshiping a person with a crown, a gold crown. He wanted it to be a theocracy. Theo, God, where God is in charge. Everyone's worshiping God. But they know better, just like we know better. Nope, thanks a lot, God. I know, you're the wisest of the wise. You're the I am. We know everything else, yada, yada. We know better. We'd really like a king. So could you give us one, please? And God says to Samuel, okay, but remember this, taxing, enslaving, and taking the land. So Samuel, tell him to get ready. And before you know it now, we're going to have a new covenant because the nations have come together into a kingdom, and they're going to get what they're asking for. And if you learn a lesson from this like I do, that's this. A lot of times what we want is not what we need. And sometimes God, to teach us a lesson, gives us what we want, so that hopefully in humility we'll realize that what we want and what we need are 2 different things. And what's going to get us to heaven, what's going to fulfill that why, what's going to give us salvation, is what we need. So sometimes when God says no to what we want, that's in our best interest. We're going to talk about that in the next section. We'll be right back.